I didn't cry when my daughter-in-law forgot my birthday again. I didn't argue either when she sent me a $3,000 invoice for a yacht party I hadn't even been invited to. I simply opened my banking app, transferred her exactly $1, and wrote 5 words in the memo line, "I am not on board." Then I started shutting down every account they had been using under my name. I haven't really done big birthday celebrations since my husband passed away 8 years ago. Honestly, my favorite way to spend the day is in total peace and quiet with a perfectly brewed cup of coffee and a slice of homemade plum pie. I learned a long time ago not to hold my breath when it comes to other people, especially my son Harrison and his ultra-business-minded wife, Julianne. When my 67th birthday rolled around on a random Tuesday in October and the two of them completely ignored it, it stung at first, but I kept my mouth shut, swallowed the hurt, and just went about my day. Exactly 1 week later, I was sitting at my familiar kitchen table in my cozy brick house just outside of Portland, Maine, when a new email from Julianne popped into my inbox. The subject line was short, transactional, and completely cold, "Invoice Harrison's yacht party." Attached was a detailed PDF for exactly $3,000, billed directly to my full name under a bolded category that read Amly Contribution Share. Julianne had tacked on a brief, almost clinical note. She emphasized that after such a stressful year at the office, Harrison deserved a truly special celebration and that, of course, all family members would be splitting the costs for the private boat charter on the autumn coast. I opened the attachment and scrolled through the itemized expenses in silence. Gourmet seafood catering, a professional DJ, brought in from Boston custom nautical decorations. But when I reached the final page and scanned the complete guest list, my name was nowhere to be found. They wanted my money for the yacht, but they had absolutely no intention of having me on board. In that moment, there were no tears. I didn't feel that paralyzing, bitter disappointment. Instead, a sudden, ice-cold clarity washed over me. I realized right then and there that to them, I wasn't a mother or a grandmother anymore. I was just an ATM with a heartbeat. Instead of picking up the phone to call Julianne and blow up at her, I logged into my online banking. I transferred exactly $1 to the account listed on the invoice. In the memo line, I typed 5 words, "I am not on board." Then I put my phone down and looked out the window at my backyard, watching the sharp autumn wind whip the first colorful leaves off the old oak trees. I knew for a fact that this single dollar was going to trigger an absolute avalanche in my son's life. But deep down, I was completely ready to take that first definitive step. That $1 transfer was just the opening salvo. The real meticulous work began later that evening at my desk. For years, the family's most important subscriptions, shared accounts, and joint plans had been under my name. I had set it up that way ages ago to help Harrison find his footing when he was first starting his career and money was tight. I opened my laptop, turned on the desk lamp, and started going through the monthly auto drafts line by line, tapping into my old skills from my days as a professional bookkeeper. I started with the weekly upscale organic grocery deliveries that Julianne regularly ordered to her house on my dime, without a second thought. Then came the premium streaming services for music and movies where every single family profile was tied to my private credit card. Even the monthly gas card I had given Harrison, which was strictly meant for emergencies, was being used daily for his routine commutes. Without a shred of hesitation, I changed the passwords to every single account and immediately routed the 2-factor authentication to my personal cell phone. Next, I canceled the authorized user card on my credit account, The one Julianne used as if it were her own for her daily runs to the high-end boutique bakery downtown and the local beauty supply shops. I didn't call any authorities and I didn't waste money on lawyers. I simply erased my name from their financial equations. It was a strange, almost heavy feeling, a mix of deep grief and immense relief with every click of the mouse. But my hand didn't shake once. I had loved these people, but I had also taught them that my generosity had no limits. At exactly 10 o'clock, I sent a brief, unmistakable text to the family group chat. As of right now, all accounts and cards under my name have been restricted to my personal use. Please make alternative arrangements. I didn't bring up my birthday, and I didn't demand an apology for the audacious yacht invoice. I flipped my phone face down on the nightstand and went to bed. The fallout didn't take long. I knew the streaming apps would already be cutting out during their primetime TV viewing. The next morning, my phone buzzed relentlessly against the wooden nightstand, just as I was pouring my first cup of coffee in the kitchen. The notifications rolled in minute by minute first, from Julianne, then Harrison, followed by a long voicemail that I didn't even bother playing. Audrey, what is the meaning of this? My entire cart of groceries was just declined at the register. Julianne texted in furious capital letters. Shortly after, Harrison sent a message that almost made me chuckle. Mom, my gas card suddenly isn't working. I'm stuck at the station and had to pay cash. Please fix this right now. I'm in a huge rush. Not a single text asked how I was doing. Nobody mentioned a belated birthday gift that was never going to show up anyway. They only noticed the closed financial doors the second they ran smack into them and the cold rain of reality set in. I deliberately ignored the calls and spent the entire morning in the sunroom carefully repotting my sensitive hibiscus plants, a soothing task that demanded my full concentration. Around noon, a familiar car pulled into my gravel driveway. The loud, aggressive slam of the car door told me everything I needed to know. Harrison had arrived. He burst into the kitchen without knocking, his face flushed from walking briskly, his car keys gripped tightly in his right hand. What is going on with you, Mom? He demanded, without so much as a hello, throwing himself into a kitchen chair. Julianne is a total wreck at home, and I just had to spend my own money to fill up my tank. I looked at him calmly, washed the black soil from my hands, and sat down across from him in silence. I gave you that card years ago for real emergencies, Harrison. I said softly but with a firm edge. Not to fund the daily comfort of your high-maintenance wife. He shook his head in total disbelief, telling me I was being impossible and throwing a massive tantrum over a simple birthday card they had just forgotten to mail in the middle of their hectic schedules. In that exact moment, it became glaringly obvious that my son's perspective was completely warped. He didn't see me as his mother anymore. I was just an inconvenient obligation. Harrison sat across from me, trying with all his might to revert to our old family dynamic, the one where I would end up apologizing for my own feelings just to keep the peace. Julianne has been planning this yacht party for months. It is incredibly important for my professional networking and landing new clients, he explained, trying to sound like a rational, mature businessman. And you're blocking everything over a tiny detail. You're 71 years old, mom, not a little kid who gets to pout. I felt the heavy weight of being called childish hang in the air, but it didn't cut me the way it used to. Harrison, I said, placing my hands flat and still on the wooden table. The two of you sent me a bill for $3,000 without even inviting me to the party. That is not a tiny detail. That was a conscious, disrespectful choice made by both of you. For a split second, he looked caught off guard, clearly surprised that I had actually looked closely at the attached guest list. That must have just been a mistake on Julianne's part when she printed out the document. Of course you were supposed to come. He lied straight to my face, unable to look me in the eye. I didn't believe a single word. Julianne's notorious perfectionism left absolutely no room for errors like that, especially when social status and other people's money were on the line. The accounts stay closed as of today, I said firmly, standing up slowly to make it clear that the conversation was over. He stood up, too visibly angered by this new, unfamiliar stubbornness from a mother who had always given in. If you keep acting this selfishly, you're going to end up sitting all alone in this big house pretty soon. He snapped at me on his way out, slamming the heavy front door behind him. I stood alone in the kitchen and took a deep breath. The real loneliness had started long before today. This was just the quiet before a massive change. I pulled a small blue binder out of the cabinet and began systematically filing away all the financial statements from the past few months. 2 days after the showdown in my kitchen, the practical fallout of my new boundaries hit a level that Julianne could no longer ignore. The luxury yacht charter company sent an automated urgent notification to everyone on the original email thread. Understandably, the deposit due could not be charged to my credit card. The strict deadline for confirming the boat reservation was set for exactly 2 o'clock that Friday, and the account was completely short on funds. In her desperation, Julianne had tried to run the card online multiple times, but the block I placed was absolute and held steady against every attempt. She fired off an incredibly toxic text message. "You are actively ruining my entire reputation with our closest friends. Authorize the charge for the deposit immediately, and we can sort out the money details calmly after the fact." I didn't respond with angry words. Instead, I simply sent her a clean screenshot of the guest list where my missing name was highlighted in red, followed by a single matter-of-fact sentence. "If I'm not going on the cruise, I'm not paying for the ticket." Late that afternoon, I ran into my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, whose daughter happens to be close friends with Julianne. She let it slip that the entire yacht party had to be canceled because the steep last-minute cancellation fees swallowed up what little money they did have down. Julianne had tried to scramble to rent a much smaller boat from another outfit at the marina, but with it being peak autumn foliage season on the coast, everything was completely booked solid. The high society image she wanted so desperately to project to her friends had popped like a cheap bubble, and in her eyes, the blame for the entire debacle rested squarely on me. Shortly after a post appeared on her social media page, a solid black background with bitter text. "Some people will destroy their own family's happiness out of pure greed and envy." I printed the post out in silence and added it to my blue binder without letting my blood pressure rise. It was just another piece of documentation for my reality check file. I was realizing more and more that my financial support had been the only thread holding us together. Of course, the ugly story didn't stay confined to our 2 houses. Julianne began a targeted smear campaign complaining to the extended family and mutual acquaintances about my supposed cruelty. My sister-in-law Brenda called me the following Sunday to delicately probe into what exactly had gone down. "Audrey, Julianne is telling everyone in town that you're completely abandoning Harrison financially and that you ruined his big birthday milestone out of pure malice." Brenda said, her voice laced with concern. I stayed completely composed, took a small sip of my tea, and explained the situation factually without any emotional embellishment. I simply cut off access to my personal accounts because they sent me a $3,000 bill for a party I wasn't even invited to. I told her truthfully. The next morning, I emailed Brenda a copy of the PDF invoice and the official guest list so she could see the objective reality for herself. The long silence on the other end of the line after she received those documents was the only validation I needed. The naked truth travels fast in a tight-knit community, and Julianne's venomous attempts to paint me as the evil, miserly mother-in-law crumbled within days. My son called me on Tuesday evening. His voice sounded noticeably heavy over the phone, a far cry from his aggressive tone in my kitchen. "Mom, can you please stop discussing our private family matters with Aunt Brenda? This is incredibly embarrassing for us." He practically pleaded. "It was embarrassing for me to be forgotten on my own birthday 5 years in a row. Harrison," I replied calmly, hanging up the phone before he could formulate another excuse. I could see clearly that my refusal to play the quiet victim was completely shifting the power dynamic between us. They were finally having to live with the public consequences of their own actions, something they had never been forced to do before. On Thursday morning, Harrison showed up at my door unannounced again. This time, however, he had Julianne in tow. Despite the overcast sky, she was wearing oversized sunglasses and had her arms tightly crossed over her chest. They stepped into the house at my brief invitation, but instead of sitting at the kitchen table like they used to, they stood defiantly in the narrow entryway, like two strangers passing through. "We need to settle this right here and now, Audrey." Julianne started, her voice sharp, controlled, and intentionally leaving no room for pushback. "Your impossible behavior is putting this entire family's financial stability at risk. Harrison is under immense stress at work, and we need your support to cover the financing payments on the new SUV." I leaned casually against the wooden doorframe of the kitchen and just looked at them, my face unreadable, refusing to offer a single justification. "There is nothing left to settle when it comes to my finances," I said quietly, but with an underlying hardness. "The accounts are permanently separate as of now, and the credit cards will not be unlocked for you." Julianne let out a short, ugly, condescending laugh. She told me I was selfishly destroying everything we had spent years building together. Harrison stood by in total silence the entire time. He looked back and forth between his domineering wife and me, completely incapable of taking a stand or diffusing the tension. "If you don't help us right now, we are cutting off all contact with you. You won't see your grandkids a single time this holiday season." Julianne finally threatened, her voice rising. It was her ultimate trump card classic emotional blackmail. In the past, I would have crumbled instantly and given them whatever they wanted. I looked Harrison dead in the eye and asked, very slowly, "Are you really standing behind this decision of your wife's son?" He looked down at the floor, ashamed, and mumbled softly, "You're really not leaving us any choice, Mom." I nodded. Wolees opened the front door wide and said just one word, "Leave." As they walked down the steps, I felt a deep, unshakable wave of relief wash over my chest for the very first time. The second their car pulled away from my property, I called a local locksmith. By that afternoon, I had every lock on the front door and the back gate completely changed. I knew Harrison still had an old spare key that he had never returned, despite me asking for it multiple times over the years. I wanted to be absolutely certain that my personal space was protected and that no one could breach my privacy unannounced ever again. The next few weeks turned out to be unusually quiet and peaceful. The phone in the hall stayed silent for days at a time, and no angry text messages disrupted my daily routine. I used this unexpected freedom to completely recalibrate my life. I booked a small, relaxing solo trip up to the coast of Maine and started meeting up regularly with old friends from my working days, people I had neglected for far too long. I was amazed to discover that without the constant financial demands and the emotional baggage that came with them, I suddenly had so much more energy for myself. My monthly expenses plummeted, and the money in my bank account finally stayed where it belonged in my retirement fund for the years ahead. Around town, the drama surrounding the canceled yacht party had long since blown over. People knew exactly who was in the right without me ever having to make a scene about it. One afternoon, I found a short note from Harrison in my mailbox. It was handwritten on plain white paper and left without a stamp. He wrote that he and Julianne had been fighting constantly lately since money had gotten tight without the extra cushion, and that he missed the old, easygoing times. It wasn't a real, heartfelt apology. It was more the desperate reach of a man who was painfully realizing that his comfortable lifestyle had evaporated. I read the letter through twice, filed it away in my blue binder with the other documents, and consciously chose not to reply for the time being. The lesson wasn't over for them yet, and I wasn't about to give in just because someone else's self-inflicted loneliness was getting loud. Almost 2 months after the yacht incident, Harrison texted me asking to meet up in person at a neutral spot, a quiet little cafe right on the waterfront. I agreed to the meeting under 2 non-negotiable conditions. Julianne could not be there under any circumstances, and we would not spend a single second talking about my money or unpaid bills. When I walked into the cafe on that breezy afternoon, he was already sitting alone at a small window table, staring blankly out at the sailboats rocking in the choppy harbor water. He looked noticeably exhausted. His hair was a bit unkempt, and his clothes weren't nearly as perfectly pressed as they used to be, back when Julianne strictly managed his daily schedule. "Thanks for coming, Mom. Despite everything," he said quietly, his voice a bit thick, as I sat down across from him and ordered a hot tea from the waiter. "I wanted to apologize today, not about the money or the blocked cards, but because we treated you like an afterthought and forgot your birthday 5 years in a row." I looked at him for a long moment, arching his face for any sign of a new financial angle. But this time, his eyes looked genuinely tired, caught up in the harsh realities of life. "It was never just about that one birthday, Harrison," I explained, keeping my voice steady and firm. "It was about the fact that for years the two of you treated me like an institution, something that functions silently in the background, but doesn't actually have feelings of its own." He nodded slowly, reaching out to hold my hand for a brief moment. He openly admitted that they had both gotten far too comfortable, relying on my endless generosity. He then told me that he and Julianne had started marriage counseling the week before because they finally realized how much their obsession with status had fractured the family. I didn't promise him a quick fix or a return to the way things used to be that afternoon. I told him plainly that real trust takes a long time to rebuild. We finished our tea in peace, chatting about the weather and the boats, and for the first time in years, it felt like a real conversation between a mother and her son. Life didn't magically transform overnight after that meeting, and we certainly haven't become a picture-perfect family that sits down for a harmonious Sunday dinner every week. Julianne keeps her distance entirely now. She sends polite, incredibly brief texts on major holidays, but the emotional and physical boundaries between us remain firmly in place, which is exactly what my peace of mind requires. Harrison comes to visit me by himself once a month now. We take quiet walks along the beach or spend Saturdays working side by side in the garden, and the topic of finances never crosses his lips. My accounts and credit cards are managed solely for myself, and the grandkids came to stay with me for a whole week last summer, completely free of conditions or interference from Julianne. Going through this gauntlet taught me that drawing hard lines doesn't mean you stop loving your family. It just means you finally stop sacrificing your own well-being for the comfort and ego of others. My blue binder filled with the old invoices, screenshots, and angry texts still sits visibly on my office shelf, but I haven't opened it in months. It stands as a silent reminder of the day I reclaimed my dignity and my life. On my 68th birthday this year, Harrison showed up at my door at 8 in the morning, holding a small bouquet of fresh wildflowers and a cake he had baked himself. There were no expensive gifts, no grand staged speeches, and no private yacht rentals. It was just real, honest time, spent peacefully together. As I blew out the single candle on the cake, I didn't feel a single ounce of resentment about the past 5 years. Instead, I felt a deep, quiet contentment with the present. I had kept my home, my financial independence, and my self-respect, all because I had the courage to send exactly $1 when it counted. The wide ocean outside looked calm that day, and I knew with absolute certainty that I could steer my own ship through whatever storm came next.